Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for coming to the crypto panel. I promise it won't be boring. Just to get a feel for the room, I'd like to put it to you. Please put up your hand if you've ever bought crypto. OK. Please put up your hand if you will never buy crypto. OK, some people could be sold on that. No, I just bring this up. It's interesting. The title is Crypto at a Crossroads. And I've done this for about 10 years. Once upon a time, no one would have owned crypto, maybe one or two. But this also sort of reflects this sort of split sitting in Hong Kong right now. I've been watching Hong Kong from a distance for a while because there's two things going on. There's a crackdown on crypto sellers a little bit, unlicensed ones, but they're also trying to build the city as a destination for crypto because right now in the US, it's a very hostile place and a lot of American entrepreneurs are leaving. The question is, should they go to Singapore, should they go to the UAE, or should they come to Hong Kong? So let's start with you, Joy, because I know you live here, and I believe you're working with Hong Kong on their crypto policy.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I'm part of the Hong Kong government's Web3 Development Task Force, which they established last year, really to, as a forum, I think, for engaging with industry and getting feedback from market participants. And it certainly has been a very interesting and dynamic space in Hong Kong in the last 12 to 18 months. We have seen, very strong initiatives from the government from a policy perspective aimed at, really developing Hong Kong into a hub for digital assets. And they've obviously been working very closely with the regulators. We've got, new regulatory frameworks. We've got guidance and circulars from the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, from the SFC. Through the task force, I can share that, the government is certainly very focused, continues to be very focused on doing what it can to facilitate the robust development of the ecosystem, but at the same time, protecting investors. So it's a very delicate balance, I think, that has to be struck, but certainly a lot of very positive energy, a lot of movement in the right direction. It's just a very interesting space, very vibrant, and we're seeing a lot of activity in a lot of different segments, I guess, but all very much focused on digital assets here.
Yeah, how about you, Edith, as the investor? Where do you think, who's building the most sort of crypto-friendly environment for investors?
Just to echo what Joy just said, I think Hong Kong needs crypto as much as crypto needs Hong Kong in many cases. And as an investor, when we look at the different cities around the world, who's going to be the next crypto hub? It's really about 4 or 5 different criteria. Are there great tech talents? Are there really friendly policy? Are there very strong financial markets? But more importantly, which is quite unique in this part of the world, there are some real pain points. So similar to yesterday's conversation that we have about mobile payment. For the longest time, sure, we had Cash App, from Block, but really credit card is so strong. So we often sort of question, do we even need stablecoin in the US? But in this part of the world, it's actually a lot of remittance requirement and real pain that I think this part of the world really are trying to solve, very different from the US.
Yeah, and let's get to you, Emily, because TBD is a unit of Block, which was called Square. They're a very, very innovative company in terms of payments. And you go to Africa, you go all over. So what are you seeing as kind of the most promising areas for crypto?
Yeah, so we're excited because what we're really seeing is this mass secular shift happening in the crypto industry, where if you looked, 3 to 5 years ago, it was a lot of early experimentation. It was a lot of speculation, lots of projects with tokens. And now I think we're really shifting into an era of utility and into possibly an inflection point of mass adoption where we move beyond this as an investment class and into the use cases that Edith touched upon, where remittances and the ability to use Bitcoin or stablecoin rails to facilitate near instant, much cheaper, much faster remittances, which is relevant for Hong Kong, given the huge remittance corridor between Hong Kong, Philippines, Hong Kong, Indonesia that we see. There's very huge use cases around trade. Hong Kong has always been a center of capital and trade, and also a gateway to China, right? And as we look around the world, I meet a lot of African or LATAM entrepreneurs who are trying to buy supplies from suppliers in China. And consistently what I hear is due to various factors around the world around fiat challenges, and that could be them being unable to get the number of US dollars they need to actually pay their suppliers. They're often getting only 20% of the liquidity they want to be able to do this kind of cross-border trade with China or with Hong Kong. And through the power of stablecoin and Bitcoin, what's really exciting is you can unlock that full 100% of liquidity that's needed, which has huge implications for empowering individuals, empowering businesses, and even uplifting economies.
Yeah, I think that stablecoins, too, are very interesting technology. I mean, a lot of people don't like crypto, they think it's bad or whatever, but it's ultimately a technology, and technologies aren't really good or bad. They're there, and they typically, they don't go backwards. I mean, that's why I think we saw that last week BlackRock has developed its first kind of fund based on tokenized assets. But let's go back to stablecoins, because we're talking backstage about how stablecoins and geopolitics, because geopolitics has come up a lot at this conference, and part of that is the U.S.'s control of the U.S. dollar, and the rival countries are a little tired of that. The U.S. perhaps has been a bully with the SWIFT system, looking for something else. So stablecoins has emerged, but paradoxically, a lot of it is U.S. stablecoins. I'm going somewhere with this, and where I'm going is right now what's going on in Nigeria, and I don't want to put you on the spot, Joy, but what's happened, I don't know if you saw this story. A couple executives from Binance were brought to Nigeria because the government wanted to speak to them. The Nigerian government has taken them hostage. One guy got away, and the other one's an American citizen being held hostage in Nigeria. And the reason this is going on because Nigeria is blaming crypto and Binance because its currency is failing. I realize it's sensitive, but can you say anything about this, Joy?
Look, I mean, obviously, very, very difficult for us to comment on an ongoing situation, but obviously we are, doing what we can to cooperate and doing everything we can really to make sure that our people get home safe and sound as soon as possible.
And I mean, Emily, you work in Africa. What's going on there with Nigeria?
There's huge use cases for stablecoin in Nigeria, given the inflation, hyperinflation happening with Naira, the local currency. Given many of the use cases we've seen, there's tremendous product market fit that already exists in countries like Nigeria or countries across LATAM. One of the more exciting situations we've seen is, for example, a Nigerian pharmaceutical distributor who actually purchases his drugs from an Indian manufacturer. Typically, he would run into liquidity challenges, like I referenced, only being able to get 20% of the currency that he needs. And the other 80% that he would need would come at such a disproportionately expensive FX rate that it would just erase all of his margins. But by using stable coins, he's actually able to do 100% of the business he seeks internationally in terms of trade. And so throughout the continent and throughout countries like Nigeria, we are seeing just incredibly powerful use cases for stable coins. And we think that they can coexist with local fiat, right? Because at the end of the day, it's a much more innovative rail. It's 24/7. You can move money more seamlessly and at a lower cost. But when you actually need to pay people in local fiat, pay taxes in local fiat, et cetera, TBD is working on a protocol that enables you to coexist in both worlds and easily on and off ramp, specifically to serve a lot of these B2B and B2C use cases.
Yeah, programmable money, there it is. Edith, I know you're a venture capitalist, not an economist, and perhaps we should ask Larry Summers this one, but what do you see in terms of like how stablecoins are affecting the dominance of the US dollar?
Well, I think that's part of the reason why I think Hong Kong government and Joy being part of the task force really wanted to set the stage and welcome everybody to think about beyond US dollar. If you think about it, I think this is the one city really spent a lot of times like solicit and talking to private sector of what, it's not just about creating the e-Hong Kong dollar or stable coin, it's really about the commercial use cases, right? You can create one if nobody actually uses it, it's a different story. So it's really interesting to sort of watch in mainland, they actually started working with, just to start with the Alipay and the WeChat Pay, to sort of monitor, hey, and roll it out city by cities. And in Hong Kong, at least my understanding, and please chime in, that there's like 16 various different like commercial private companies from the Alibaba, Visa, to Ripple, Circle, to want to really explore if Hong Kong does roll it out, how can we actually use it? Are we going to use like the Octopus card, or is it going to be beyond remittance? Or I actually talked to one of the local wallet payment company. They started actually have commodity trader to actually settle trade because it is cheaper They didn't really care about it is crypto or not crypto. What they're excited about is that they don't have to pay all the expensive fees.
I mean, look, I agree. I mean, it's just a very, there is a lot of activity, there's a lot of focus on it. I think we do see a lot of large international, global operations entities really focusing and thinking about, what can they do here, what are the use cases, and it isn't necessarily just about crypto, which, has, I guess, comes with its own connotations, but there is a lot of focus on, the underlying technology and, the efficiencies and the other benefits that people can leverage from that.
Yeah.
And that sort of alludes to another topic that interests me a lot is the role of corporates and payments because, the margin on payments is 2% or whatever, but if you're dealing in trillions, that's a lot of money, which is why you're seeing like, PayPal's in there with a stable coin. You're seeing Block doing a lot. And the one I'm waiting for is Apple and Amazon because watching Apple Pay, sort of watching the companies become banks. But forgive my lack of knowledge on this part of the world, but I'd like someone on the panel perhaps say, like, where is WeChat and where is the sort of Asian players and the apps and the companies? Are we going to see them doing stable coins or crypto at all?
Frankly, like personally, I've been waiting for Facebook to roll out something on WhatsApp. And I think like they're testing in India maybe. And so in some sense, I think for sure, like the rolled out stablecoin, it would not be America. It will be in this part of the world. Very, very much so. Hopefully it is Hong Kong to start. But the key thing is really thinking about like what is the super micro payment. If I want to buy you a coffee instead of like, could be Venmo in the US, but let's just send Emily and Joy, a red pocket, sort of similar to I give it after a Chinese New Year, and roll it out literally in millions in 24 hours if we want to. But in the US, not so much.
I mean, I have a slightly different perspective. I think there's been so much innovation in domestic payments, right? I mean, Alipay, WeChat Pay in China has been at the vanguard of it. In the US, our Cash App and Venmo have been like, it makes it so easy to send money domestically. And even in terms of real-time payment systems, like Brazil has Pix, Mexico has Spay, India has an incredible real-time system. The hard challenge that has not been solved is across borders. Right? And the reason that challenge has not been solved today is because legal, regulatory, compliance, and trust are really hard problems to solve. And that's actually one of the big unlocks that we are working on is in a decentralized world that can help bridge borders and transcend domestic payment systems and the limitations of it. If you can solve the trust issue, I know who you are, I trust that you are who you are. I trust that you have title to the goods that you're trying to sell me. If I can solve the compliance issue, like I can fulfill KYC, I can fulfill AML, that's what's going to bring decentralized technologies into the forefront and give us that Sputnik moment here.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. The technology's there. It's silly not to use it. And I do think the technology's there. However, it's again, when you're messing with a country's money, like Edith, you said, where are you waiting for Facebook? Remember, Facebook tried this in the US about 5 years ago. They went to roll out currency to go with WhatsApp and Messenger and stuff, but Facebook's very unpopular in the US. And the best thing I read is Facebook launching money would be like trying to raise a private army. There's a couple things governments do not like. Do not challenge their military and do not challenge their currency. Yeah. And I think that's why we have these countervailing forces. Decentralized money, Bitcoin is growing and growing, but then we're seeing India and also China with their sort of domestic things. I'm kind of curious how it's going to end. Is there room for both? Can we have decentralized money at a time when states are trying to re-exert their control over national currency?
Look, I think it's really definitely an interesting point, and I think, touching on your point about, rules and compliance and regulation, and I think one of the challenges really is the fragmented nature of the regulatory landscape, and I think that is a real challenge when it comes to, cross-border, but going back to your point, really, it's interesting, I guess, seeing the different approaches that different regions take, and I think that ultimately, yes, that we will find a way for both to coexist, but we are just going through this very difficult period at the moment where, people, countries, regulators, they're trying to figure out how do they want to approach this. And then you've got, more global organizations like FATF who are coming in with a very specific view and an intention in terms of, what their objective is and what they're expecting countries to do. So it is this very, challenging and fast-moving evolution at the moment in terms of the landscape and the framework that organizations have to operate within. But I do think that eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later, we will get to a place where there is a little bit of, I guess, balance and a little bit more consistency, I would hope, in terms of the approach that people take. And I think, Mika is probably a good example of that, where we've got, a very comprehensive and clear framework with robust mechanisms, but it's going to apply to a very large block. And I would hope that, we see more of that kind of cooperation and collaboration across jurisdictions, which will make it much easier for users as well as for people that are operating in the space and trying to innovate.
Yeah.
I just want to interrupt for 1 sec. We do have microphones in the room, so if anyone has a question for the panelists, please put your hands up. I'd love to bring someone in here too. But sorry, go ahead, Emily.
Oh, I was going to say, I think these things should exist and coexist. I don't think it's a matter of one or another. Bitcoin and stablecoin bring tremendous promise, and I think they can coincide alongside fiat money and self-sovereign money, right? And so this is where, with TBDEX, our protocol, it is about building bridges to connect this very fragmented world that we live in, where you have so many different domestic payment systems, you have sovereign currencies, you have Bitcoin, and in order for this to have mass market appeal, you need to enable consumers to be able to easily bridge between both of these worlds, to have the benefits of both, without having to really understand the technology, right? If we had to understand how a combustion engine worked in order to drive a car, we'd be in a lot of trouble. And I think in this next era, I think with our kids, it's like my hope is that sending money around the world will be as easy as sending an email, and they won't have to think about the complexities and challenges today where people are being charged $10, $15 for every $200 they're trying to send. They're waiting in line at Western Union, sometimes being told to come back the next day. Like, I think governments will recognize that there's a lot of benefits with having these global rails that make it easier to move money and value across borders to the benefit of people who currently, it's the poorest who are being charged the most. That's the benefit of Bitcoin and stablecoin and coexisting alongside fiat.
Yeah, I went for a walk. I mean, most of you probably here know Hong Kong very well, but it was my first time here, and I went for a walk yesterday, and I found this sort of mall, and it was like 20 of these money-changing places. And I mean, in the U.S., you might find one of those. It's like, what's going on? I think Emily, you explained to me it's all foreign workers sending money home. So it'd be sort of 20 of these money things, and like 2 crypto ones there too. So it's really interesting because remittances do seem like a killer app. Does anyone want to predict if this will ever break out? Because I mean, if it's as good as we say it is, we almost kind of don't need these 20 kiosks doing this. But so how long will it take, and who's going to win this?
I'm happy to venture that I think this is going to happen soon. I do think that we are at this inflection point, and as I mentioned, the 2 hardest things we have to solve for are compliance and trust. And that's where we're doing a lot with W3C standards around decentralized identity and verifiable credentials to be able to ensure that you can fulfill KYC, KYB, AML requirements. And I think with that unlock, we're at the precipice of this huge moment in which I do think that decentralized technologies are going to be as transformative as Gen AI, which has been a big topic of conversation. I think it's going to impact everyone in this room. If you conduct global payments, if you move money across countries and borders, if you pay employees or suppliers across borders, there is a better way to do this. And once we solve these very hard problems around trust and compliance, that's going to be the breakout inflection point in which this has mass appeal and enterprise adoption.
I think we're sitting on stage talking about this, but if you ask your kids and nieces and nephews, they've already been on crypto world for a long time. Those are the winners. And if you think about it, we're talking about very serious use cases, but in gaming or NFT, like all these use cases been around for quite a few years. And if we wanted to see the future of fintech in this case or crypto, just ask your young kids at home, and they're like, "Where have you been, mom and dad?" So this is something I think the young people really will win.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because the crypto's famous critics, Jamie Dimon, who said he'd fire anyone stupid enough to use it, and Warren Buffett, who calls it rat poison stuff. These guys are old, and it's very hard to find people under 40 who are saying things like that. And Bitcoin's now been around for 15 years. So you're right, everyone in high school's had it and has had a wallet and are used to the technology.
Yeah.
See, I remember the early days of the internet too. People would be like, this is just for plagiarism or crime or pornography. And it's funny, technology can be for good or for bad. But speaking of Bitcoin, we got to talk Bitcoin real quickly. It's back to $70,000. The big debate in the US right now is as BlackRock, Fidelity, these are kind of the premium brands in the US are now offering it in ETFs. What does this seem like in Asia? Like and with the things when BlackRock and Fidelity do it, it means they suggest it as a model portfolio for retirement accounts, all that. What is give us the state of play of Bitcoin in Asia in the mainstream?
So I think we are definitely seeing more interest from corporates, institutions, which previously had sort of said, oh, crypto. No, it's not really for us. I think it's now at the point where, a lot of people just can't ignore it. I think there are certainly people who are not believers, and that's fine, but they still at some level feel like they have to have some degree of exposure because it's very difficult, I think, for people to continue to ignore that, particularly with the developments we've seen in the US with the ETFs, which really, frankly, legitimizes, I think, digital assets as sort of a separate asset class, and it clearly says that it has a place in everyone's portfolio. So I think that, in terms of what's happening in Hong Kong, as I mentioned before, we've had a lot of guidance and a lot of new regulatory frameworks from the SFC, and they've made very clear that they're open now to approving, Bitcoin spot ETFs, and there are a number of asset managers based in the region that have applied. So, we're expecting that we will see some development on that front in Hong Kong in the next couple of months, and I think that it really is just the beginning. And, as Edith said, Asia, I think, is where we see a lot of activity and a lot of asset managers, a lot of crypto natives, all really focusing on what is the next thing. And I think in terms of ETFs specifically, obviously we've seen Bitcoin in the US, but there's a big question mark over Ethereum. And I feel like there is a bit of a race because I think in this space, often being first to market has a lot of advantages. So I think it's definitely something to watch in Hong Kong.
Well, in Hong Kong, one of the biggest asset managers, CSOP, launched a Bitcoin ETF, and they're exploring an ETH ETF. And from my perspective, that's really good that around the world, some of the most legitimate and large institutional investors are offering this as an asset class to consumers more broadly. I think that's going to raise the level of education, it's going to raise the level of ownership, and it's going to continue this secular shift from owning Bitcoin as a speculative asset into owning Bitcoin and not even thinking about Bitcoin, right? You talked about how Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon had some critical views of it, but I will posit that we will orange pill them and they won't even know it, because what's going to happen is the minute they have to send money across borders, when our rails are up and running, we're going to send it to them way faster and cheaper, and they won't even know that Bitcoin was involved.
I don't think Jamie Dimon's too worried about moving money around, but very quickly, Edith.
Well, as Emily mentioned, the CSOP, they actually launched the ETF in 2022. But of course, definitely is not like BlackRock, that fastest growing ETF in history to get to 10 billion. And I think in this part of the world, it's actually quite a bit of adoption, but just don't get as much of a media attention. But I think everybody particularly in Asia, basically treat Bitcoin as the digital gold already. It's part of the investment portfolio. So as an investor, I think this is something that I'm kind of excited about because we're very focused on infrastructure, on how do you support this whole movement. And
I want to slip in one more question because we're almost out of time, but there is a little problem with crime in crypto you might have heard about. For instance, in New York today, Sam Bankman-Fried is going to probably go away for 20 to 40 years for massive fraud. Joy, before you were on the panel, we had KuCoin, but then they got charged with massive money laundering crimes by the US government. This keeps happening in crypto. And frankly, Binance, your founder, is going to be sentenced probably to 1.5 years in jail. To be clear, Binance did not conduct any fraud, unlike FTX. But at the same time, you're seeing Binance trying to go mainstream. You've got a CEO who is a former regulatory of Singapore from the central bank. So I guess very quickly, will Binance succeed in going mainstream? You can start, Emily, and just very quickly.
Will Binance specifically?
Yes.
Well, I mean, yes, right? I mean, they're already quite mainstream, and I think there's a role for many exchanges around the world. So at Block, we recently launched a hardware wallet It's available in 98 countries, and the whole intention is to make it very easy for anyone to do self-custody of Bitcoin. The next step after launching this beautiful device that's meant to simplify ownership of Bitcoin is to connect with all of the major exchanges around the world.
Including Binance, yeah.
Including Binance, yeah.
Okay, very quickly, Joe,
yeah.
I think I know what you're going to say, but is Binance going to be succeed in going legitimate?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, obviously, things were done which was not necessarily done in the most robust way, in the most compliant way, but that was a historic thing. That was a very transformation period of, you know, rapid growth, and we've had, as you've said, a change in leadership. We have a change in culture. We have a very much a focus now on compliance. So we are very focused on, you know, continuing our mission, which is to facilitate the freedom of money, but in a compliant way. So I think, you know, what we have seen is significant investment in compliance in particular, you know, this cultural change. And I think that, you know, as the regulatory frameworks develop across the globe and we have a little bit more cohesion and consistency, you will see that, you know, the operators that are always very focused on doing the right thing by their users, protecting users, they will come to the fore and they will survive. And I think Binance is certainly one of those.
Okay, Edith, you get the last word in 10 seconds. In 5 years, is Binance still going to be an outlier, or are they going to be more like just another bank?
Oh, I think Binance will still continue to be number one. And as an investor, we always need to learn from history. If you think about it, right, the Binance, OK, and Coinbase of the world actually come to this part of the world faster than the Google and Amazon and Facebook. So as an investor, we absolutely need to pay attention to where the crypto industry is going.
Okay, well, that's very insightful. Please give a big hand to our panelists.
Yeah, thank you.